Good evening, and welcome to ProMusica Live. I'm Dan Keelan, Vice President of ProMusica Detroit and producer of this series. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our 5th episode. We have received wonderful feedback, and we know that between the episode premieres and the subsequent on-demand viewing, we have reached old and new friends. It is my hope that this effort has created a real connection to the arts in Detroit for every one of you. I'd like to offer a special thanks to the great people here at the Steinway Piano Gallery who have donated this beautiful space as they've hosted every one of these performances. And of course, this series would not be possible without the generous support of many of you. Thank you. I'm very happy to welcome a Detroit gem. Rick Robinson and his Cut Time Symphonica have been entertaining and educating our community for years. As a former member of the DSO, Rick brings a mix of talent and purpose to each composition and performance. I know that you will enjoy the show. Speaking of Detroit gems, I want to introduce our series host, Cecelia Sharpe. Cecilia's work as a music educator, performer, and on-air host at WRCJ demonstrates her leadership in the Detroit music scene. Cecelia, we are fortunate to have you with us. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to introduce Rick Robinson and Cecelia Sharpe.
All right, thank you, Dan, for that great introduction. So glad to be here, as always, with another ProMusica Live here in Detroit with an amazing guest who I've known for quite some time, and I'm excited to speak with. I have the pleasure of speaking with bassist from the Detroit Symphony Orchestra and the founder of Cut Time, Mr. Cut Time himself, Rick Robinson. Welcome to ProMusica Live.
Hi, thanks, Cecelia. It's so good to see you again. I think it's been about 10 years that we've known each other and even used to play together. So
yes, and for those of you who don't know, he's an incredible bassist, composer, arranger, founder of an organization taking classical music beyond the concert hall. And he's been amazing from the start. If you didn't know, he was invited to be a part of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra without auditioning. I don't know who does that. I guess Rick Robinson. So Rick, can you talk about being invited to be a part of the DSO without auditioning and your journey from that point on with the Symphony Orchestra?
well, DSO has always hired a lot of Black substitutes to come in. And I started subbing back in '87, along with Tim Holly and Tim Edwards on violin. And we were invited on a European tour with the DSO back in '89. And at the time, DSO was getting some state money, $1.25 million, and 2 state legislators threatened to withhold their committee votes unless DSO immediately hired more Black musicians. And Deborah Borda was executive director at the time, and she suggested that the musicians consider hiring one of the 3 of us on the tour. And I got an overwhelming vote to pass in by the recommendations of my colleagues in the bass section, and the other 2 didn't. And I decided to take the job, come all the way back home. I've been living in Boston basically at the time, and the rest is kind of the beginning of my history, trying to always take classical music to the next level and be part of the wider public's menu of choices for music.
How did the DSO shape you as a person, and just expound on that experience? Because how long were you with the DSO?
22 years.
22 years. So that definitely had an impact. Can you speak on that?
Oh, huge impact, yeah. Particularly the repertoire that we played and the music director we had, Naime Yervi, was, I came in the very last year or 2 of Gunther Herweg. And in total contrast, Naime Yervi was very interested in jazz, and he liked to program a lot of Duke Ellington and William Grant Still, music that we recorded, Black composers Loved to write for the orchestra. So we saw a lot of that kind of blending classical with jazz together, and that became an inspiration for me once I learned that I could compose, which took a few years of arranging music for the first group that I started within the orchestra, Cut Time Players. And once I started composing, it was with the idea of starting a second ensemble of strings that could play in even smaller rooms, be even cheaper to present. And then that led to playing that in bars and clubs and adding drums and, kind of mixing up classical with rock and R&B and gospel elements as well.
Wow, that has been an incredible journey and definitely an impactful one from the start. So classical music has had a reputation, if you will, of being elitist, exclusive, sometimes out of date and irrelevant, and relegated to the concert hall. But you have sought to take classical music beyond the concert hall and into classical venues. Talk about that venture and how that got started and why.
Okay. Well, Cecilia, I really think it's all in how we look at it. When I was young, I grew up in a classical music family. Mom played piano. My sister played violin. She later got into drumming. My older brother, he played cello and the bass and the saxophone, and he was doing arrangement back in high school, off the radio for his high school, band to play. So I knew music was adaptable. We had all kinds of influences in the house, but I didn't think that it was something that I could do until, I had this job and I got music notation software. But how I always looked at classical music was this dusty old tool that we could pick up off the floor, blow the dust off, and express ourselves, even though we didn't write this music. It wasn't written for us per se. It's really, having gone up to Interlaken, not only a little bit in the summer, but to the Arts Academy, there's this theme, the universal language of the arts. Well, what is that about? How do we bring that to life? And then learning about the public domain, that the copyrights of Beethoven and Mozart's music expire. So the music really belongs to all of us. It depends on how we want to look at it, what we want to do with it, how we might be able to update it with some drums or some beats or a flat five every now and then, is what I've come to learn. But I've always been able to find myself even in, the most classical of classical music. It's really how we look at it. So, how do I change that frame of reference for people far outside of classical music? Well, I show that it's really about building and releasing dramatic tension in a series of waves that climax near the end of the movement. And what is that drama about? Well, it could be about anything. The strange weakness of classical music, that it has no lyrics or singer to give it context, to be flipped on its head. Because it has no lyrics, it means it could be about things you wouldn't think that music could be about. So a Mozart symphony could be about having a pleasant day, and then the clouds come and we start getting rained on, so it gets frustrating, and how we deal with that frustration. But the ambiguity, the vagueness of the music works in both ways. So I just want to get people to open up quite a bit to this music, just like I have. And one of the best ways is when we can all participate in the music. So one of the things I've discovered to do in the bars and clubs is to, I don't have one here, just take a little, egg shaker and get people just playing along, adding their voice, if you will, through the percussion to the music when our drummer is playing. So, because when people find themselves at the center of the music, when they join the music, they get the same feeling that I get when I'm playing them.
Yeah, they become a part of the ensemble.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. As presenting classical music, that's something everyone can relate to. And I know that I seek to do that when I'm hosting the radio show or my radio show or filling in just making it relevant to the people who are listening, to our dear listener, and connecting those stories and making them current with today, and the connections and tidbits about the composers or the musicians from back then, and that, things were different, but they still are definitely relevant to how we are today.
Yeah, and in classical music, you'll hear a lot of little references to that. Like I think there's a lot of horse riding in classical music. Like dump digga dump type of rhythm. There's a lot of marching in classical music. Like you're in an army or something like that. And we don't have conscription like they used to back in the old days. So we don't march. We don't do anything like that. But those are examples of things that are written in the music that the community related to it. It had a much larger social role, to associate with it. We just don't have those connections anymore. But we could still imagine them. We could, think of an old movie or something, or when we play something in waltz time, seeing people waltz lets us know what to do with those kinds of rhythms. But generally the public today doesn't know what to do with the waltz rhythm.
No, they don't know what to do with the waltz, but I think sometimes they understand the conversations that people were having back then, the stresses of being away from home or getting involved in something that you just felt like obligated to do. Maybe you didn't really want to be the organist for the church, but you had to make some money, and you really wanted to perform on your own and not compose for the court per se, but maybe you wanted to travel and be on tour.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to note that J.S. Bach never thought people would be playing his music beyond his lifetime, and then it took maybe 50 years later, Mendelssohn coming along and saying, "Have you seen this music? This is fantastic. We should be playing this all the time," and that's kind of started this whole, even the word classical, reviving older music because there's so much value to it. And that value can be immediate, but it might take learning a little bit about the language, the expression. So
yeah, go ahead and set up the first piece. Tell us a little bit about it.
So yeah, we're gonna open with the music of Duke and Mercer Ellington, and it's a really great piece that we played in the Detroit Symphony with Neme Yervi, from the ballet Three Black Kings. This is the opening movement called Martin Luther King. And it's a 12/8 gospel, takes us right to Ebenezer Baptist Church for a sermon by Dr. King, the great civil rights leader. And just starts very, very quietly and simply and builds to this elegant, passionate argument and returns to that quiet, lovely countenance that Dr. King had.
That's incredible, and I'm looking forward to hearing that composition. Ladies and gentlemen, Martin Luther King from the ballet Three Black Kings. That was Cut Time Symphonica, performing Martin Luther King from Three Black Kings, composed by Duke and Mercer Ellington. Leslie definitely knocked it out of the park with that incredible solo. Of course, she was joined by bassist Rick Robinson, who is my guest today, as well as Eliot Heaton, violinist, Daniel Winnick, violinist, and Mike List, percussionist. Woo. Yeah.
One of our favorites.
I could tell, definitely. So I want to shift gears a little bit. It's no secret that we have been in a pandemic for just over a year now. And I wanted to ask you, how has music helped you to cope during this pandemic?
Well, like for everyone, it's pretty depressing at first. And being out of work, not being able to play, I was still able to be creative, still able to compose. And I wrote 4 pieces last year, almost all of which came to me, inspired by what we're all going through, but also out of the blue. Sometimes, ideas come to me as I'm napping or waking up from a nap. So I always try to roll with those ideas. And 2 elegies came out, that one for Cut Time Symphonica, another for full orchestra. And then there was another piece, a romance for my patron, Barbara Van Duzen, who got me through all of last year. Very grateful to her. So this is a romance based on the story she told me how she met her husband decades and decades ago. So, and plus I finished an elegy that I started in the wake of the Sandy Hook shooting back in 2012. A really beautiful piece about what the parents had gone through, and how they were motivated to rise up and challenge the gun laws and Remington manufacturing. So, and that piece is now recorded remotely. So that was a good project for me to work on. And also with Eliot Heaton and his wife, Ran Chang, and Derek Reeves, who maybe you don't know this violist, but wonderful players all, to record a piece that I released, which is called Let the Children Play. Oh, plus I got on my bike a lot. I biked off 30 pounds. So, got to keep the lungs and the heart strong, right? During a thing like this.
Yeah.
And writing on the computer, my thoughts and my feelings, that was, really, really helpful to get things down on paper.
Yeah, that's something definitely. Everybody, you don't have to be a composer. You can take out your journal and go ahead and get the pen and paper going and just write down those thoughts and feelings and release that energy. You have definitely been busy during the pandemic and coming up with so many creative ideas, being able to complete prior ideas. So that's incredible, very amazing. And I think it's how do you say, it's inspiring for those, because some people, it has been a really tough time for people, and they don't haven't been able to find that outlet or move past this dark time. And I think hearing from you and hearing how you've been able to go ahead and compose and record and write and bike too. A lot of people have been talking about that COVID weight that they've gained, but you lost some no COVID pounds for you. You're shaking the pounds.
Well, I should mention the flip side is I learned how to cook buddy style pizza. So I'm doing that every week, at least twice a week. So one for me, one for my sister with whom I live. So one thing I wanted to do early on in the pandemic is create a podcast series. So something like this, where I'm talking to the camera, I'm talking about why I do classical music. I think it's really important for those of us who love classical music to share how we get benefit from it. What is our way into it? What do we feel like classical music is about? Because if it's in our own words, it's better than if it's, an academic exercise. In fact, I think the problem with classical music is there's so much that's academic or so much that's, sacred space about it when we really need to be playing up the sexy side. I find classical music really, there's a lot of sensuality in it, and a lot of hard-hitting violence in the accents. For me, it's like a great movie, that's happening right there. And there's so many different ways to make it even more so. That when I conduct or when I direct my ensemble, I get to make sure that it has all those sexy and violent qualities that make it over the top dramatic. So Bernstein said, let our response to stuff like this be to make music even more sexy and violent, basically. That's what he's trying to do. So my inner Bernstein is to say, let's go all the way. Let's show the spirituality, the gospel, the things that really take our heart and let it fly up out there, and how it brings us together too. The community things, the dance that's in classical music, the song that's in classical music, the fireworks we shoot off, when we play those fast passages, that we have to practice all the time. So, but my playing skills aren't what they used to be, so I can't record Bach and have it come out like I used to be able to. So, I have to use my mouth, what I say. Maybe I can come up with some dance moves, that people can do that illustrate the rhythms of classical, because they're different from pop. So I wanted to do this podcasting series. I'd need better equipment, but I'm hoping with some new investments this year, I'll be able to start that podcast series.
Well, we're definitely looking forward to this podcast from my guest, Mr. Rick Robinson, Mr. Cut Time, who has been graciously spending his time with me here, sharing about his journey, talking about classical music, and of course, getting back into the music. So I think we have a little bit of Mozart and a little bit of Beethoven. Tell us what we are going to hear.
Great. So yeah, Mozart and Beethoven, right? The bread and butter of classical music. Why do we play this 200-year-old music? Because it still speaks to us. We can take those rhythms, we can make it our own. That's exactly what we did on the Detroit Symphony Orchestra stage, and what we'll do on the Steinway Piano Gallery stage in a couple of minutes. We have a short little ditties, just 2 minutes long, a sample of the opening of Mozart's 40th Symphony, a la Samba, because I rationalize, if Mozart were born today, and he loved to play, let's say he was born in Cuba, and he loved to play salsa, but he still liked to write symphonies, maybe the 40th Symphony would start like this. And you'll see it's really nice. People really respond to this kind of music. And then right after that, we do a cut time version of the opening of the famous Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, Ti-ti-ti-ta. But mine has a very clever cut. You'd never know it. It just cuts right to the second theme of the recap. And we get to make it our own. And the great thing about classical music as a musician is we get to shape it, ti-ti-ti-ta, ti-ti-ti-ta. That doesn't always come across over the electronically. So in the streaming, that kind of gets limited. Over the radio, that kind of gets shrunk down too. But in a live performance, you get that whole dynamic range of the soft and the loud and the contrast that they give each other to make it more dramatic. So hope you enjoy what we do with it, because it is fun to play.
Here is the dynamic Cut Time Symphonica with a twist on Mozart Symphony number 40. Is a little samba in here, and Beethoven Symphony number 5, the first movement. ladies and gentlemen, I know that you definitely enjoyed the Samba excerpt from Mozart Symphony number 40. I know I was doing my dance, as well as the first movement of Beethoven Symphony number 5 from Cut Time Symphonica, founded by Mr. Rick Robinson, featuring Eliot Heaton and Daniel Winnick, violinists, Leslie Deshazor, violist, and Mike Liss, percussion. And they brought so much richness and flavor to that work. Whew. I
Shake it on.
put a little stirring it all up.
And even more fun, we got these improvisers in the group. Eliot Heaton, master improviser. Leslie Deshazor, master improviser. Of course, our rhythm section, you know, they can hang along with anything, but they add so much variety and flavor and help me mix it up. Like, you know, if a classical concert is like, okay, you got your meat, you know, you got your broccoli and you got your starch, right? But with Cut Time, you know, I'm like adding barbecue sauce. I'm adding black pepper, you know. More
Did you put some Lowry seasoning salt in there?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, just all kinds of ways. Because, you know,
herbs and everything.
Well, the lines and dots on the page, you know, that's just the recipe for the music. You know, we are the cooks. We get to take this music and it's all about making it our own. And if I learned anything from naming Yervi, you know, he's someone who could just, you know, throw in surprises and the piece spins out in all kinds of new ways. So that's what I always try to do with Cut Time.
But before we get back to the music, as I said, time for a little bit of conversation. This is on a more personal note, Rick. You know,
I thought you'd never ask.
I like to say that the members of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, so many of them have been very influential, positively impacting, nurturing to so many young people, especially, I have to speak for myself, to me, you know, and just being able to have access to the musicians when I was at DSA and even in college, it was just so amazing to know that that support was so close and so sincere. And I have to say, you specifically, when I saw you in the orchestra, as well as Mr. Striplin and Ken, I saw people that looked like me. And that's not necessarily that at that time, maybe not as typical to expect to see people that looked like me in the orchestra. And I wanted to let you know that you definitely opened the doors in my mind of what the possibilities were for me in classical music. And I just knew I was going to be in a symphony orchestra because I wanted to I said, oh, there are African-American men in the orchestra. I can be an African-American female in the orchestra as well. And I just wanted to let you know that it was very inspiring. You may not have saw me when I was a youngster, but I definitely saw you and want to thank you so much for the inspiration just by being there and taking those steps.
Thank you. Well, you know, and it's funny you should say that because, you know, I had the same experience from Joe Striplin, who joined the DSO back in '72. And it was my older brother and sister who invited him to lead a chamber orchestra in Highland Park, where we grew up. And, you know, there was one rehearsal that I went to, and I was in the Barber Middle School band. My brother talked me into bringing my tuba to a Highland Park Chamber Orchestra rehearsal. And they were doing Brandenburg 3 and Schubert 8. And I couldn't read a note. And I sat there crying because the music, I was in the middle of the music. I was part of the music in that room. It was resonating, you know, through me and around me. And I just cried that I couldn't be part of this music. So I vowed then I was going to take cello the next semester. And that's what got me into strings and changed my life and eventually go into interlock and everything. But, you know, I wouldn't have even credited Joe Striplin until just about 10 years ago, you know, with planting that seed in me that I could be in an orchestra like that. But, you know, it works generationally. It grows from a seed. So yeah, I'm glad you had the same experience.
Yes, definitely. Hopefully I have planted some seeds. You've definitely planted some seeds. Mr. Striplin has planted some seeds, and you've given many young people, including myself, the tools and the knowledge that we needed to grow and build and to blaze our own trails and blaze them with confidence and equipped with the knowledge that we needed to have to create those trails and paths and hopefully plant some seeds for the up and coming generation. So just wanted to take some time to say that. Haven't seen you in so long, and I said,
Right.
oh man, this will be a great time to highlight that.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. Well, and there were other inspirations too. On PBS, I saw James DePriest conduct the Winnipeg Symphony and Mahler's Fourth Symphony, and I recorded that off the TV with my little cassette recorder. I held it up to the TV the whole concert, and I listened to that for years, just inspired by this black man conducting this whole symphony orchestra. So, black man leading. But I was also inspired by Pablo Casals, the Spanish cellist, and Gary Carr, had a solo career on the double bass, for gosh sakes, and what they could do, the standards that they all exhibited inspired me to adopt those standards, to climb that ladder. And I was lucky enough to be able to make the cut.
Yeah, definitely. That when you mention excellence, I think about being in the civic orchestra in high school and college, and they demanded excellence from us. Maestro Burke would walk on the stage, and we were playing some of the same symphonies as you guys, but we were teenagers, and he treated us like we were in the DSO, and the expectations were high, the bar was high, and we had no idea how deep we were into this, but we knew that the expectation was for us to be excellent, for us to excel, achieve, and that we were going to have a concert, and we better be ready. And so that bar of excellence was always there. And you also mentioned PBS. That's how I started playing the cello. I saw someone on DPTV playing the cello in an orchestra. The camera zoomed in on him. I said, oh my gosh, what is that instrument? It's the cello, and it zoomed out. I didn't care about the rest of the instruments. I saw that cello, and I knew that was it for me. And I was switching schools. They had an orchestra program in Detroit Public Schools, and that was it. So hearing your story about watching public television and being inspired reminded me about seeing DPTV and being inspired to start the cello as well. And my parents, they knew that they always invested in me. So they're like, okay, she wants to play the cello. Okay, that's the next thing. Okay, we'll let her play this cello and try it. And they did. So I'm grateful.
Well, Cecilia, how competitive the music world is. I mean, not just classical music, but even rock bands. There's so many great musicians out there.
Yeah.
How do you stand out? You have to get good. You got to rise on top of those, master those standards, and then go to the next level to individuate yourself, separate yourself from the competition. But in that sense, it is a sport. It is a game. And once you accept the rules of the game, you can make a name for yourself getting on top of that sport. Now, there's a difference between, let's say, playing basketball and going to the Olympics. And I think of the classical music as a little more Olympic-like. So, you're competing with the best in the world to try to stand out, and that's really tough to do. But it's possible to do. And in just shooting for that, in aiming for that, you might not get there, but it definitely makes you a more happy, satisfied musician to try.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the skills that you learn as a classical musician, you can take them into any genre. I mean, I've played so many other genres, which I love, performing other genres, including classical, but other genres as well. And those techniques and skills that you learned as a classical musician, they definitely help and apply um, like I said, in other genres of music when you get on the stage. And yeah.
Yeah, well, any instrument that we play is an extension of the voice. We can sing through those instruments. We can do dance rhythms through those instruments. Plus, we can do fireworks. We've got a 4-octave range to deal with, and that voice doesn't tire out. So it's kind of a voice on steroids, super voice.
Well, speaking of some extensions and all the things we can do, I think that the audience can get up and dance to the next two pieces.
Definitely.
We have William Grant Still's Symphony No. 1, the Animato, and Scott Joplin's The Entertainer. All right, guys, you have been enjoying such a fantastic performance, a blend of classical and jazz with William Grant Still Animato from Symphony Number 1, and of course, the also familiar Entertainer composed by Scott Joplin, with, of course, once again, Rick Robinson, our guest and bassist, violinist Eliot Heaton and Daniel Winnick, violist Leslie Deshazor, and percussionist Mike List. You're not tired yet, are you, Rick, with all of this performing?
No. Yeah,
Okay, good.
I could do this all day. So
You guys hear that? He could do it all day, so we might have an after show. All right, so I want to talk about your ventures in composing. You didn't necessarily just start off composing. I know you're a bassist. You started arranging for the members of Cut Time. You were arranging symphony works in the 90s for the members of Cut Time. And then around 2003, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you wrote Essay Number 1 after Sibelius, so your own 20-minute work that you penned and was premiered by the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. Talk about that journey into composition.
okay, it's pretty interesting and pretty accidental, actually. No, I just wanted to be a composer. I mean, when given the choice to conduct, I said, I think I'll just keep playing the bass. So, end up in DSO, where I really wanted to be a good ambassador for the orchestra, out in the community and do something different, because the educational constitution, okay, that's fine. We preach to kids and stuff like that. But what about family audiences? I think, students learn best when they get permission with their family, with their parents along with the way. So how can we get them all together and bring symphonic music to them rather than expecting people to come to Orchestra Hall and pay the tickets and dress up and sit all quietly and stuff like that. So I started Cut Time Players on this instrumentation by Igor Stravinsky, which was just 7 pieces, and we added flute, and I did Peter and the Wolf because I always thought it would work beautifully. So we were asked by Lyric Chamber Ensemble to do more, a whole family concert series that led to Till Eulenspiegel and The Sorcerer's Apprentice and the Comedian Suite of Kavalevsky, and these kind of narrative type of things that would get people to come out and check them out. But unbeknownst to me, I was learning kind of how to compose by taking apart these symphonic works and reducing them down to 8 instruments. I was learning, kind of how things are put together, how harmonies are filled out, how the different voices, work smoothly. And I had this waking dream in '99 that was the beginning of the essay. And I got it into the computer, and over the course of one divorce, I fleshed out the piece over the next few years. And fortunately, DSO had a African American composers readings that I was able to apply to, and won a reading with Thomas Wilkins conducting. And it was just such a mind-blowing revelation that that I could do this. And even at the end of it, I didn't think of myself as a legitimate composer. It wasn't until 2 years later, when Thomas Wilkins asked to premiere it properly at the Classical Roots concert in 2006, that I started going, I wonder if I could do more of this, if I could compose more deliberately. So I sat down with the idea of writing for a string sextet, because, I forget who said that basically the human mind can hear about 6 different voices at the same time, make out the different voices. So I thought I'll write for string sextet, see how it goes. And that's what led to Cut Time Symphonica, began as a string sextet. I started with writing about my fiance and I, how we met, how we got together, all that kind of romantic type of stuff. This is even before I started adding rhythm and blues and gospel elements. That was the second album that, I tried to get down, the second slew of compositions, which I called the Get Your Groove On album. I wanted to take classical music from the Viennese type of paradigm and put it squarely on the asphalt in America, back in Detroit. So I did the title track, Get Your Groove On, which is a classical player taking a night out on the town looking for a dance groove. And almost instantaneously, I had the flash for the first 4 bars of Pork and Beans. And it even has lyrics, if you will. I love pork and beans, don't you? Really R&B type of thing, right? And then the contrasting second theme is like we're in Mexican town, and there's this huapango that keeps coming back, and that's where the shaker comes in, and where I invite the audience to come in as we pass out shakers and cowbell, for only one cowbell.
More cowbell.
Yeah. And even before I started passing those out to the audience, I would invite 1 or 2 people to come on stage and play those for us. So, it was always trying to get the audience to come in on these type of things. So, Get Your Groove On and Pork and Beans were just a watershed that I could blend, like William Grant still did, in that Animato that we just played, blend urban pop of his time, with classical counterpoint and development type of things. So I've gone on to do much more with that recently with the premiere of Phantom Detroit with my poet partners from the Urban Requiem Project. Now there are street poets led by Virgil Taylor and Kevlar Africa and Claretha P. Spell, who joined me in talking about issues of gentrification, as well as the Duncan McMillan, the DMAC Jazz Piano Trio, joining with Cut Time Symphonica, and that was a really great extravaganza too. But if one can write all these things out, one can weave together different kinds of music and poetry together to make new art forms. So that's what innovation is for me, and how I take my art to the next level, always.
An innovator, not just a composer, an innovator, Mr. Rick Robinson. Before we get into Pork and Beans, I have one more question for you.
Sure.
Why Detroit? You were in Boston, you came to Detroit, you were with the DSO for 22 years. Why stay here? What makes Detroit so special to you?
Well, besides having family here and knowing so many people that I've met during my 22 years in DSO, and the fact that it's less expensive than most other major cities in the country. Oh, and plus it's a Great Lakes state. We've got so much within driving distance. And Interlaken, where I went to school, is just such a beautiful state to live in. Really great people in and out of the city. I can't quite see going anywhere else. Although I still have dreams for Cut Time to expand, and I might have to take it east once the pandemic is over. But Detroit has just been the place where I can make a lot happen. This is a place where one or a few people can really make a difference, can really make an impact, and innovate without having to garner so many powerful friends to do it.
Yeah, it's home.
Yeah, it's that too, but there's so much potential here.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely, and there's a room for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you could set up this last piece that we are going to enjoy, Pork and Beans.
All right. Yeah, Pork and Beans is it's a way to talk about classical music as a plate of food, and we got the spicy pulled pork over here, and some spicy Latin American beans, black beans, and then some coleslaw, over here, for contrast. And we take a few bites of the spicy pulled pork, and then we take a couple bites of our spicy Latin American beans, and then I had on this quartet version I had to leave out the coleslaw, so we never get rid of that heat. But to be able to talk about the music this way and alternate this very classical counterpoint and development with some actual improvisation that Eliot and Leslie are going to get into it and go back and forth before it goes back into this classical counterpoint type thing. And then it, just ends beautifully. Everybody yelling how much we love pork and beans. And it's one of my most popular pieces, and I hope you enjoy it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rick Robinson's Pork and Beans. I hope you're hungry.
1, 2.
I know you guys were feeling the heat from Rick Robinson's Pork and Beans, lots of flavor from Detroit. You got your pork and beans, your black beans, the pulled pork. Apparently, we left off the coleslaw, so it was nothing but heat mixed with a little bit of Detroit funk. Ladies and gentlemen, Cut Time Symphonica, bassist Rick Robinson, violinist Eliot Heaton and Daniel Winnick, violist Leslie Deshazor, and percussionist Mike List, closing out such an incredible concert with so much color and variety. Rick, thank you so much.
Hey, you're welcome, Cecelia. It's so great to see you and talk to you. And I really want to thank ProMusica Detroit for having us out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rick. And thank you to all of the musicians that performed with Cut Time Symphonica. I'm Cecelia Sharpe, and that does it for this exciting episode of ProMusica Live Detroit. Thank you to all of the sponsors and, of course, Steinway Gallery. I will see you next time on the next edition of ProMusica Live Detroit. Until next time, bye-bye.
Hi, Tins.
Right.
Yeah, there's some funk in there too. But
You see my funk face, right?
yeah, gotta have some funk. Detroit funk.